G'day and welcome to Viking Superpowers. Got something very exciting for you today. We're going to just watch this short clip from a wonderful documentary. The documentary is from a channel called Area 52, a really great channel. And it's called UFO Experts Discuss Alien Encounters, full documentary. So make sure you don't miss that. I'll have that link in the comments below. So let's go to this clip.
But how about the Nordics? They look like humans, only better looking. Where are they from? Do you have human beings like evolve on another planet that look exactly like us, that can fit in? There is no way that on another planet in a full evolutionary cycle, you get a Swedish model. No way. And so they have a huge amount of our DNA.
If you're just adhering to normal astronomy, Occam's razor would say that's not right, because you have all these different, atmospheric conditions, and, if you're in another planet, the likelihood of evolutionary convergence. I mean, we know now there's silicon-based life. So even just the idea of carbon-based life, let alone, we have 8 million species on Earth, 20 are, I think, upright and bipedal or something.
So what do they look like?
Blonde, muscular, perfect body, human-looking entities that had kind of a different eye feature.
They're generally a specific age, 30, 35, perfect features, but I've heard they've got these blue piercing eyes.
The Theosophical Society in the late 19th century, people like Madame Blavatsky, and what is the first root race? There are, 7 root races or whatever. I believe the second is the Lemurians. I believe the third is the Atlanteans. The first root race is the Hyperboreans. These sort of tall, white, earth conscientious creatures or whatever.
Is there a story in particular that comes to mind when thinking of these human-looking ones?
Well, no, I think it would be probably, in my case, Betty Andreason. And there's lots of reasons for it. First, Betty's story is so compelling. Betty had heard and repeated what she thought was star language. In other words, it was not an intelligible language to her. But when I read it and then listened to the transcript, it was very clear that it had something to do with Gaelic. But it wasn't Gaelic. It was something like Gaelic. And I found an expert in the UK, as I recall, and he said it was a very old form of Gaelic and that it meant children of the northern people, you wander in eternal darkness. And that has been a kind of byword of mine ever since.
So wasn't that incredible? There's another half that I'm going to show you. But what's in my mind is what I've been thinking about for quite a while. Are these Aesir, these people that I've just written a book about, the creators, inhabitants of Asgard, both old Asgard in Turkey and new Asgard up in where the Swedish royal family says that Asgard was built, in the west of Sweden, on these 2 amazing flat-top mountains that just raised straight up out of the plain beside a huge lake called Lake Vänern, and the mountains are called Halleberg and Hunneberg. And the Swedish royal family says in their museum there that they consider these to be Asgard and Valhalla. And there's even a smaller landform called Odin's Lookout. So, going back to that Betty Andreason quote, when she encountered these Nordics, these blue-eyed or green-eyed blonde people, she remembered that they spoke something that sounded like star language, but when Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, heard the tape and the transcript of that, like a hypnosis session where she was able to recall and actually speak this language, he immediately thought that sounds like Gaelic, and Gaelic is Scottish Gaelic, mostly spoken in the the islands in the west of Scotland now, but it used to be spoken all over Scotland, and Irish Gaelic, which is still a living language in Ireland, as the Scottish Gaelic is, but in Ireland it's still very strong. And basically he considered that it sounded like the Gaelic language, so they went and, when he was in the UK, he found somebody who was an expert in Gaelic, played the tape for him, and that person said this is really ancient Gaelic, very old Gaelic that's not really used so much anymore, which I find incredibly riveting, to tell you the truth, because part of my ongoing research for my next couple of books is looking at the ancient legends of Scotland and Ireland, particularly Ireland, and the people that were considered like the gods of the north, the Aesir. In Irish Gaelic, they're called Aesir. It's not hard to see how those two are connected. And when you look at the stories between both the Scandinavian stories written in Iceland and these ancient Irish stories, and there must be still stories existing in Scotland, they sound like the same people, you know, the stories of them living within rocks, having great big areas within rocks that and sort of secret entryways, and they can fly, and sometimes they're nice and sometimes they're not so nice, which is very much an elf behaviour. And the elves are probably the same people as the Aesir. It's all something we're discovering as we go on. But this connection between the Aesir and the Aesir, it has to be real, and that's what I find riveting, is that these people called the Nordics are still here. You'll hear more about it in the next segment I play, but they're supposed to be walking amongst us, that they're benevolent, that they really care about the earth and nature. They're my sort of aliens, and they really do sound like the descriptions of the Viking gods, you know, Odin and Thor and Freya, Loki, Tyr, you know, Frigga. All there's lots and lots of individual characters that are laid out quite clearly in the stories. So I find that very exciting and very encouraging, both for me to get into the Gaelic a bit more, because my main focus is learning Icelandic and Old Norse, which is not a simple task, but I'm getting places with it. Many years ago, when I first bought my Icelandic course, I did have a dream of also learning Gaelic, and the only Gaelic that I recall, besides different words like piobmor, which means big pipe, that's the Scottish bagpipes, scian dú's, little black knife that we put in our sock when we're wearing the kilt. Scian means knife, dú means black. But there's a sentence that I remember. It's Haran kumor dú ekandoras, and that literally means there is a big black dog at the door. So my friend Ed might find that interesting, actually, that I remember that. So let's get on to the next segment and we'll discuss that.
I don't know. There are a few, you know, like there's the Ingo Swan at the supermarket, you know, saying this woman is ravishing. And I believe she was kind of this tall, blonde, you know, beautiful woman.
There's two of them that happened in the same year, and that's Travis Walton, that I believe 100%. And then there's the Billy Meyer story that I believe at 30%.
The Nordics really first appeared with the Billy Meyer work and case, and that's a very, very, very complicated case.
But, and then of course, you know, something we experienced together that the, you know, our audiences will see at some point is Charles Hall, who spoke to the tall whites, spent a lot of time with them, but also the Nordic people with the 24 teeth.
I'll tell you, I have two, I call them bookend stories. They go perfectly together.
I was following Timothy Good, Above Top Secret. You know, that was like my research encyclopedia. for making Out of the Blue, and then I don't remember if he talks about it in a book or if it was a subsequent interview, but he talks about him seeing one and then communicating telepathically. And Timothy Good, in my book, was a very credible guy. He's a prolific writer and considered to be a really good researcher. So that kind of got my attention a little bit about 20 years ago.
2008 or no, 2009, I was at some place in Vegas talking to an Army colonel, retired colonel, who had a lot of experience with black projects. He was a brilliant guy. And he told me a story about he and his wife was with him when he told the story. And they had another friend, a female friend, and they were at a Las Vegas casino. And he said, this guy, by the way, knew a lot about the UFO subject, but he said, we're on our own time. We're hanging out at a casino. I think it was the Wynn, actually, which is a great casino hotel, but I can't recall. He said, we're up there, we're on the second floor, and our friend, he said was a psychic, she stops two of them and she says, that woman over there is not human. And they look over and there's this very beautiful blonde woman in this striking blue outfit. Now it's Las Vegas.
Yeah.
You get that there.
Sure. Blue is interesting too.
Oh, yes. She and his wife get scared and they go down the escalator, which is right there. The colonel is hanging behind and he's looking at this woman. And he said to me, and that's when I heard her in my mind, she turned slightly and he said, I heard her, she sounded like a cop on the beat, like, nothing to see here, go about your business, you don't belong here. Like, and it's like, how did I get that thought? And at that moment, she's joined by this beautiful blonde man wearing blue. Again, are you thinking Cirque du Soleil? Like, I don't know what this could be. But so they're hanging out, they're conferring. He doesn't hear anything at this point. So then they start walking toward the escalator where he is. So this guy is a colonel. He has a PhD. He's a sharp guy. And he's thinking, I am going to talk to these people. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm going to talk to them. I want to find out what the hell is going on here. So they walk toward him, and instead he says nothing. They get on the escalator, they go down, but then he gets behind them. And he said to me, I heard them conversing in their minds. I said, do you know that they weren't talking? He says, look, I'm pretty damn sure they weren't talking. I'm hearing. What were they saying? Well, they were saying something like, yeah, he can hear us. No, he's not important. He's not part of the program, or he's not part of anything we need to worry about. At this point, his wife interjected in the story. She was hilarious. She's like, oh yes, I remember this. My friend and I were peeking around the slot machines like this, like hiding behind the slot machine. So that was kind of nice little confirmation there. But anyway, so the couple gets down to the bottom of the escalator and they walk out and they're gone. So then the three of them are conferring and they're like, that was crazy. So the woman, the psychic friend, also did regressive hypnosis. And she says, I could regress you, Colonel, so that maybe you can relax and maybe you can remember if there's anything more that you can remember about what you think you heard. I guess that was the plan. So he's like, all right, cool. So he goes a day or two later, he's at her place in this cul-de-sac, quiet neighborhood. And he said, every time that she tried to regress me, we heard like construction noise outside, like jackhammers. They would go out to look and they didn't see anything. So he says, no biggie. I'll be back in about a month. Maybe we can get together and do this then. She's like, great. So a month later, he calls her. He says, hey, I'm going to be in town. Can we do that regression? She says, what regression? The regression last month, Las Vegas. Apparently, she remembered nothing of this encounter.
Okay, so that was a pretty great story. There's a lot to unpack there, but essentially, as soon as he started saying that, I thought, that's my friend Colonel Alexander. It's Colonel Dr. John B. Alexander. I've done a few great interviews with. You should check them out. Have a look in my video list. You'll find interviews with him there. Absolutely incredible. And he's also just happens to be the person that I consider not the straw that broke the camel's back, but the final bit of evidence that convinced me that my experiences and memories of paranormal experiences in my life, telepathy and clairvoyance, and even certain telekinetic and energetic experiences weren't just delusions. He, because of his vast experience in the US Army, and he worked with the CIA, and he's been right in there with all the cutting edge researchers, including people like Ingo Swann, who's mentioned in that clip we just watched. But it was him that convinced me, yes, there's something really actual and true to this, and the mainstream does hide it and say, oh no, it doesn't exist. If you look up paranormal abilities on Wikipedia, they'll tell you that it's all a lot of rubbish and only charlatans believe this stuff's true. But it was Colonel Alexander who convinced me, and I was lucky enough to get to meet him and thank him for that. My new book, Viking Superpowers, Way of Asgard, he wrote this tremendous blurb that I've put on the back. I'll talk about that blurb sometime soon. It's a really good one from somebody very special and very high up in this world of UFO and paranormal research. And as they mention, he's the author of UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies and Realities. So he's the guy in that story. He's the colonel who follows those people who are not quite human. What excites me about this is it just all ties in so much to what I'm doing. It really convinces me, the story about the Old Gaelic, the connection between the Old Gaelic gods, the Aesir, and the Icelandic Norse Aesir. Aus is for a singular, or Ausinjur for a goddess. Aus is for a god, so to speak. What you mightn't know is that Ireland, Scotland and Iceland were very close in the Viking Age, and they say that 50% of the DNA of Icelanders is Gaelic, is Scottish and Irish. And that's what my DNA is, half Gaelic, half Norse. When I was in Iceland, people said to me a lot, "Gee, you look like an Icelander, you really are a typical Icelander." All this evidence is pointing to the fact that not only am I right that these Aesir and the Aesir are connected, but that these Nordics, who are these beautiful, blue or green-eyed people with blonde hair, sometimes they're said to have other coloured hair, but they're humanoid, but they're human enough to be able to breed with us, and that's a big part of my book, is about how they came to the north and they intermarried with the elites of the north and created these royal families of Russia, France, Saxony, East and West Saxony, Denmark, Sweden, Norway and Britain. And there's a lot to be told about a lot of that. I've got a lot of writing ahead of me, but it looks like not only that they really are the gods of the north, these Nordics, but also they're still here. In further videos I'll tell you about some experiences I've had, some, you'd only say the paranormal experiences where I've felt that they have communicated to me. I've felt, to tell you the truth, that as soon as I started on this project I've been helped. This incredible library came to me after I first got this bee in my bonnet, as we say, about delving into the ancient stories of the northern peoples, finding out who they really were, and were they connected to this UFO phenomena? Were they purely spiritual? Were they somehow a mix? But I do feel like they're helping, and I'm not saying that they're the gods of the universe, not at all. I'll be telling you more about my ideas with that too. But I'll leave it at that. I think that's pretty exciting stuff. Who knows what we're going to find. Okay, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.